used it in the past, you notice that the client can be a little bit sluggish. Well, then you'll see some improvements in that area. There's a bunch of client-side display tweaks. There's one that was something that I had been asking for since practically day one, which is when you go to query team projects or query builds in the release management client, now it's sorted alphabetically instead of in order of creation, which was a big problem if you had a ton of team projects or a ton of builds within a team project. So that's taken care of, so you can find it alphabetically now. And the really big thing is the ability to release builds out of the new vNext or task-based build system. So for those of you that don't know, Microsoft released a brand new build system in TFS 2015 and Visual Studio Online, of course, that is a successor to the older XAML-based builds. One of the things they added was the ability to take those builds from the task-based build system and release those using the existing release management infrastructure. So before we move on, there's a bunch of terminology, and some of the terminology is changing a little bit, and some of it isn't, and there's some terms that overlap with one another depending on what you're talking about. So I just want to go through and spend a little bit talking about the terminology and just kind of disambiguating that. So I'm going to be talking about Release Management 2013 and Release Management 2015. And when I say 2013 or 2015, when I'm talking about release management, I'm talking about the existing release management client, server, deployer kind of architecture that's been available for the past couple of years and is what you're probably using today. And then there's also a new release management service that Microsoft is working on. I don't know if that's the official name, but I've heard it called the Release Management Service or Release Service or Release Management vNext. So there's a bunch of different ways that people refer to it. So if I talk about a release service or a release management service, I'm talking about something that is coming down the road. And then within release management today, we also have the idea of different types of release templates. So there's agent-based release templates, which are the original way release templates worked, where for a given server or a set of servers, you choose a set of tasks that you can run on each server for things like managing Windows services, managing IIS, interacting with the file system, interacting with the registry, all of that kind of stuff, all of those kind of very fine-grained tasks for interacting directly with the server. And then in Release Management Update 3, Release Management 2013 Update 3, let me be clear so I don't get into the terminology problem right away, Microsoft added the idea of a vNext release template where you could execute either a desired state configuration script, a PowerShell script, or a chef script within the existing release management. So just be aware of those two kinds of terminology, because I'll be referring to both of those at various points. And one thing that I want to make extra super clear before we go any further. Release Management 2013, Release Management 2015, the existing release management client, server, deployment agent architecture, it's not going away. It's still going to be provided by Microsoft, it's going to be supported by Microsoft, and it's going to be receiving updates throughout the TFS 2015 lifecycle. So basically, if you're using the existing release management offering today, right now, and it works great for you and you're happy with it, then there's no need to adopt any of the things I'm going to be talking about. You could, if you're happy with release management as it is today, you could probably just leave the presentation right now. Honestly, there's not going to be any. Microsoft's not going to be forcing you to switch. And so I hope that's super clear, just because I don't want anyone to be to feel like feel like they're getting left in the dust here. So with that in mind, the future of release management is this release management service that Microsoft is working And what it's going to be is release management natively integrated into Team Foundation Server. So if you go to Team Foundation Server web portal, just like you have the home tab and the code tab and the work tab and test and build and all of those other hubs for various actions, there's going to be a release hub, and you'll be able to manage your releases directly through the web. There will be no more need for a separate thick client piece of software that's installed on people's desktop machines. And some of the concepts that we're used to from release management are going to carry over, and it'll be immediately obvious and intuitive and wonderful if you're used to release management. And there's going to be some new concepts as well. And one of the really big conceptual shifts that's coming is that the concepts of release and the concept of deployment are being separated. So the idea of a release versus the idea of a deployment, and right now in the current release management, they're conflated into one entity. But a release fundamentally is, okay, what software am I releasing? To what environment, what set of servers am I going to be releasing it to? Who's responsible for approving and validating the release as it shifts between stages of my release path to production? And all of the metrics around that. So time between releases, length of release, things like knowing what work items are part of that release, so you have kind of release notes, and all of that kind of information. Meanwhile, deployment is a little bit closer to the metal. So a deployment is, how do you configure a server or a set of servers so that it can actually run your software? And and also, how do you actually get your software onto that machine and running properly? So to look at it in a slightly different way, a kind of typical release and deployment workflow with Release Management 2013 and 2015, the Release Management Server, would be you'd start by designing an approval workflow. There we go. So you start by designing an approval workflow. You choose what build is going to be released as part of this release workflow. You design how your environments are going to be configured. You design how your software is going to get installed. You execute a release, which actually starts the process of configuring your environments and installing software. And then throughout the process, you captures metrics and gives you that kind of release information. So the way that's changing is the release management service is still going to let you do your approval workflow design. It's still going to let you choose what builds you release. And it's still going to execute a release and help you capture release metrics. But what's changing is the actual execution of designing environment configuration and designing your software installation is going to be handled by a dedicated deployment tool. And that can be basically any tool under the sun that you can imagine. And some examples are PowerShell scripts, desired state configuration scripts, or a third-party deployment tool like Chef or Puppet, or basically anything you can imagine, anything you can integrate with. And so the question you're probably asking yourself right now is, why are these changes happening? What's the rationale behind doing this? And there's actually some really good reasons. First of all, ease of use. It's going to be a lot easier to design your approval workflows and your release path and your servers using this web interface. So a lot of the changes are being made specifically for ease of use day to day for you and your DevOps team. Another good reason is very, very tight integration with Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio Online. When I talk about TFS or VSO, I'm talking about both at the same time, just so I don't have to keep saying TFS/VSO. To me, TFS and VSO are all kind of, it's all the same happy family. So the existing release management software, for those of you who don't already know the history, it was originally a product that InCycle had created and sold to Microsoft. So it didn't have the first-class integration with Team Foundation Server that a lot of people really wanted it to have. So this new release management offering, the release management service, is going to have very, very tight integration with TFS and VSO. So you'll be able to get a lot more release metrics and a lot more information about the entire SDLC from developers committing code to build, to test, to release, and so on and so forth. Another reason is there's just this huge focus on going cross-platform and cross-technology from Microsoft. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what they're up to lately, but if you've looked at ASP.NET 5 or the new build service in Team Foundation Server, it's all kind of built on the idea that you can use these tools and you can run them anywhere. So you can develop your .NET code, your ASP.NET 5 applications, you can develop them on OS X, you can develop them on Linux, and you can build them likewise on pretty much any computer that can run Node.js. So there's just this big emphasis on going cross-platform and cross-technology. Meanwhile, the existing release management server 2015-2013 deployment model was tightly coupled to Windows and .NET. It was built from the ground up to support Windows and .NET applications. So having it support things like Linux and things like deploying, say, OS X or iOS applications, well, that was going to be tricky. So the new release management service is being built to really support deploying your software pretty much anywhere. And meanwhile, if you look at the deployment tools on the market, or configuration management tools like desired state configuration or Chef or Puppet, they're already really robust and really feature-rich. And desired state configuration is a Microsoft thing. Release management is a Microsoft thing. And what you have is two completely separate ways of managing your environment configurations and your deployment. So meanwhile, desired state configuration is actually something that is cross-platform at this point. There is desired state configuration for Linux now. So rather than supporting and maintaining two separate models of deployment, the focus is on choosing existing deployment tools, whether they're Microsoft deployment tools or third-party, and integrating with those tools. And meanwhile, for those of you that have been using the existing release management client server for a while, you've probably discovered that the classic release templates in agent-based releases tend to stop scaling well past a certain point. If you have a handful of maybe 10 or 15 actions in a single release template with 3 stages, that's not too bad to maintain. That's going to be easy to update. But meanwhile, if you end up with 100 different release templates going to hundreds of servers, you're going to discover that there starts to be a lot of copy and paste in there, and you start to miss things, and it just gets really tough to maintain. And classic release templates also don't help you enforce a concept called configuration as code. So I'm going to talk a little bit about configuration as code. And so in a perfect world, ideally, your environment configuration and your deployment methodology should be something that's comprehensible to everyone. So your ops team, who might not be technical, they might not have, or not at least developer technical, so they might not have a background writing code. So if you give a member of the ops team a PowerShell script and say, how does this look? They're going to look at it like it's written in a foreign language, you know? So having a comprehensible environment configuration and deployment is really useful for being able to review your environment configurations across the board with everyone involved in the process, which is what DevOps is all about, breaking down the barrier and communicating between developers and operations. your environment configuration should also be something that's source controlled, because you want your environment configuration to be able to evolve alongside the software as it changes and evolves and grows. And also, it should be versioned along with the applications being deployed. Because what I've seen in the past is configuration drift. And what configuration drift means, and as a simple example, if you've ever stood up a new server and gone through and configured IIS and configured all of the dependencies for your software to run and set it up and worked on it and put it into production and it worked great, and then over time, the software changed, so you needed to go and change maybe some dependencies on the server. You had to change some app pool settings around. You had to change IIS settings. And over time, that configuration drifted from what it was originally. So even if someone had written a configuration document or a configuration script, the configuration drifted off of what you thought it was or what your documentation and your scripts say it should be. So then the day comes where that server finally fails, or it finally gets decommissioned and replaced with a new one, and someone goes and takes the code and tries to run it as it used to run based on that configuration document, and they discover, hey, this doesn't work anymore. The software doesn't run on this environment as configured based on our scripts and our documentation. So having your configuration as code in source control versioned with the application being deployed helps prevent that, because at any given time you can go and you can look at source control and you can see exactly how the software should be configured, how the environment should be configured to run your software. It also gives you some nice advantages, like let's say someone finds a bug in version 1.0 of your software and you're on version 19.0. Well, if you're not versioning your environments, your configuration along with your code, then you might not have any idea how that code used to run. So you go and you try and stand it up on a VM to play with, and it takes you hours just to figure out how to get it to even run in the first place. Meanwhile, if your configuration is versioned, you can go back and you can say, okay, here's how the environment needed to be at that point in time. Here we go, and set it up in a couple of minutes. This also gives you better auditing and better understanding of your environment's capabilities. Like a big thing for me, because for those of you who don't know my background, before I got into the application lifecycle management world, I was a developer for many, many years. So as a developer, when I joined a company, if they tried to give me the password to production, I would say, oh no, please don't give me that. I don't want to ever touch production. And the reason is because if you have access to production, when something breaks in production and someone says, well, this setting changed, who changed that setting? You go and ask the team who changed it, and suddenly it's a ghost town. No one says anything. And so who changed it? We don't know. And you just have to blame it on computer goblins. We just have no idea what changed or why it changed. So by being able to take steps to start locking people out of higher environments like staging and production, and having all changes go through source control, when an environment breaks because of a configuration change, you can understand why it broke and what broke it and kind of how that evolved. So, and it's not about blaming, it's just about understanding. It can also be about blaming, of course, but generally speaking, it shouldn't be about blaming. It should be about just understanding the process and solving problems as quickly as possible, and getting to the end state as quickly as possible. And so that's all I have to say about configuration as code. So I took a little digression there, but basically, a big question that starts to pop up around this point is, okay, so I'm using Release Management Server 2013 or 2015, and I'm using agent-based release templates. Well, I want to start preparing to make the migration, because everything that you're talking about right now sounds awesome, and I really want to get onto this new release management service when it comes out. Well, my recommendation so far has been, if you're using the classic agent-based release templates, for newer projects, if you're already using them today, that's fine. You don't need to start throwing all that away if you don't want to. But maybe consider avoiding using that model for your newer projects. Instead, you can start writing your deployment scripts with a dedicated deployment tool or a tool that's better suited for deployment, like PowerShell scripts, desired state configuration, or Chef. And the reason I chose those three particular tools are just because they're what's supported today out of the box in Release Management 2013 and 2015. Meanwhile, you can then take those PowerShell scripts or desired state configuration scripts or Chef cookbooks and use Release Management to invoke those scripts. vNext release templates support that right out of the box, so that's something that you can do right away today. Or you could even use an agent-based release template to kind of copy your deployment scripts from a build drop location to the target machine and then invoke that script. And that might be an option if, say, for whatever reason, you can't enable PowerShell remoting or WinRM, which is necessary for the vNext release templates to actually communicate with a deployment target. And then once you get comfortable with that, once you understand desired state configuration or Chef or PowerShell scripts or whatever your chosen deployment methodology is going to be going forward, you can go and you can revisit your older release templates that are in the agent-based model, and you can start to consider how you could redesign your older releases using the newer model. So what I want to do is, given these three options are what are supported out of the box in release management today, I want to go and give some pros and cons. And this is in my estimation, so keep in mind, I don't speak for anyone other than Daniel Mann. This isn't Microsoft's opinion. This isn't necessarily InCycle's opinion. This is just kind of my take on things. So if we look, we have three options that are first-class citizens and supported out of the box in release management today. So the first one is PowerShell, and I have a little plus-minus list here. So PowerShell is pretty easy to write, especially for people with a developer background, especially if they're .NET developers, because PowerShell is fundamentally a .NET language, so you can actually access all of the .NET framework within PowerShell. So you can either write idiomatic PowerShell where you do things in the PowerShell way, or if you don't know the PowerShell way or you don't want to learn it or you don't have time to learn it, you can also just go and access the existing .NET framework namespaces and classes and use those however you want. PowerShell is really mature. It's been around for like over a decade, I think, at this point, or close to a decade. It's just that it hasn't really caught on for whatever reason. So it's been there. It's been on Windows. It's been pre-installed on Windows Server for many, many years. But people just haven't started to really pick it up and use it yet. But regardless, since it's been around so long, there's tons of documentation on it. Tons. Now, the tricky part is, it might be a little bit harder to write and understand for someone that doesn't come from a development background. So if you throw someone on your ops team at PowerShell and say, write a script, and they've never programmed before in their life, that might be a little bit of a stretch for them. So there's going to be a learning curve if you want to have your ops team responsible for developing deployment methodology. But of course, that's also why the DevOps role in organizations is kind of starting to come about. So it's someone that works with both the developers and both the operations team, and has enough of a development background at least to sit down and do some coding when necessary. Now, a minus for PowerShell is that it's not a configuration management tool. So Chef and desired state configuration are both intended to help you declaratively manage your environment configurations. And PowerShell is fundamentally still tightly coupled to Windows and Microsoft products. So if you're a Microsoft shop and you have nothing but Windows servers and nothing but .NET code, then that might not be a problem for you. But if you come from a mixed environment where you have, say, Java and Linux and .NET and mainframes and all sorts of crazy stuff that doesn't live in the Microsoft world, then PowerShell might not be a great fit for you for a deployment tool. Now, desired state configuration it's basically an extension to PowerShell. But what it does, and if you haven't looked at desired state configuration, I strongly recommend going and taking a look because it's pretty awesome. But what desired state configuration is declarative configuration. So instead of you writing a PowerShell script that says, is IIS already installed on this machine? No. Okay, install IIS. Is my website already configured? Yes, no. And basically, standard branching logic. So if then else, looping, just standard, standard developer stuff. Instead of that, desired state configuration is declarative. So you say, here is how my environment is supposed to look. It should have IIS installed. It should have a website called My Awesome Website. The default website, if it exists, shouldn't be there. We should delete it. And you just say, here's how the environment's supposed to look. And you give it to the desired state configuration engine, and desired state configuration takes it from there. So it goes and it figures out, here's how the environment is supposed to look based on your desired state. And it sets it up for you. So that's really, really powerful, especially because you can pass that off to someone on the ops team and say, based on your understanding of our environments, does this look okay to you? And they can read through it, and it's not looping logic or anything. It's just, here's how it's supposed to look. And they can look at it and they can say, yeah, that looks okay. Now, the downside is desired state configuration. It's a little bit newer. So it might require some additional education, even if your team is already familiar with PowerShell. Desired state configuration is on top of PowerShell, so there's a bit more to it. Another kind of downside of desired state configuration as it currently exists is there's limited out-of-the-box tools for common tasks. Now, the good news is the Microsoft's ALM Rangers organization has released a PowerShell resource or a desired state configuration resource kit that comes with tons of additional tasks for things like managing websites and managing SQL servers and managing Hyper-V and doing all sorts of fun stuff. But if you download desired state configuration, kind of out of the box and set it up, it's somewhat limited. There is Linux support for desired state configuration, but in my estimation, it's still a little bit immature. It's fairly new. So, like I was saying, with limited out-of-the-box resources, there's limited Linux resources kind of floating around on the internet at the moment. That's going to change over time, of course. It's getting better every day, but if you have a big Linux environment, desired state configuration still might not be your best bet. And the other thing is that right now it's a little bit difficult to discover new resources. Like if you've been using desired state configuration and you didn't know about the ALM Rangers resource kit for desired state configuration, you might not have, you might have had trouble discovering that without going to a search engine and looking for a specific, your specific problem that you're trying to solve and seeing, oh, good, they released something for that. But you still had to go and put that into a search engine and kind of hunt that information down. Now, PowerShell 5, which is not out yet but will be out soon-ish, I believe, is going to have a desired state configuration. Basically, I would say that it's something equivalent to like NuGet. It's not exactly the same thing as NuGet, but it's analogous. So you'll be able to find and discover and install desired state configuration resources right from PowerShell. You won't even need to go to a search engine. You can just kind of search out something that fits your requirements. So that's going to make your life a lot easier if you're using desired state configuration. And last but not least is Chef. Now, Chef is a third-party configuration management tool. So it's not a Microsoft product. But the good things about Chef are that it has a huge community. It's massive. It's very, very popular in the Linux world or in the non-Windows world. Very popular. And it has something called the Chef Supermarket, which has it's a repository of what are called cookbooks for common tasks. So if you haven't noticed yet, Chef loves its kitchen metaphors or kitchen analogies. So you go to the Chef supermarket to find a cookbook, and then you use the knife command to run it. And I'm not kidding when I say that. So anyway, it's really easy to find cookbooks for common tasks. Like if you're looking for something to manage Windows servers, you go to the supermarket, you search it, you find it, and you install it, and it takes a couple of minutes. Now, the downside is that Chef Server today, and as far as I know for the foreseeable future, is a Linux product. So it runs on Linux. So if you have no Linux infrastructure whatsoever, no one who's capable or familiar with Linux, Chef might not be a good bet for you, because you're going to have your whole Windows infrastructure set up, and then one lonely Linux server to run your Chef server. So that might not be a good fit for you then. Another downside is all of the Chef recipes that you use for managing everything it's written in Ruby. So if you come from a Microsoft background, again, and have no one that's familiar with Ruby, then Chef, might not be a good fit, because it's just another programming language you're going to have to throw into the mix. Now, that said, Ruby's not super hard to learn. I learned enough Ruby to be comfortable with Chef in a day or two. So it's not bad, but it still might not be a commitment that your team is willing to make. And another thing is that the Chef client, which is the thing that actually talks to your Chef server, is going to have to be installed on all of the machines that are going to be running Chef cookbooks. And again, that's not necessarily a big deal, especially because the Chef ecosystem has a lot of really cool tools for kind of silent installing and force installing the Chef client on remote machines. But still, it could be a little bit of an impediment to you as you try to get Chef up and running. So, which of these should you choose? I'm not going to tell you. It's up to you. There's pluses, there's minuses, but I recommend that you investigate, all of the deployment tools on the market fairly and make an informed decision based on that. So now you're probably also saying, okay, I have existing agent-based release templates. I want to migrate my agent-based release templates from Release Management 2013 or Release Management 2015. I want to migrate them into this new release management service. How can I do that? How do I do that? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is existing release management release templates can't be imported into the new release management service. There's not a switch you can flip that goes and grabs everything and transforms it. And that's just because if you've been paying attention, you probably figured out that the two deployment mechanisms that's being used are kind of fundamentally incompatible with one another. There's not a lights-off way to just change one into the other. It's just like if you look at the new build system that's based on tasks versus the old XAML build system that's based on Windows workflow, there's not a migration tool for that either, because same thing, it's just fundamentally different paradigms for doing builds. Now, the good news is the ALM Rangers are working on guidance and tooling to help you smooth that migration. And I'm actually working on that project as a Ranger, and the project is really awesome. I can't really talk about it too much right now because it's still under wraps, but I wrote a big chunk of the code for the migration tooling, and I can pretty much guarantee you that it's going to make your life a lot easier. If you're trying to migrate your agent-based release templates to something that you can run out of, say, PowerShell. So the last question before we actually take a quick look at the new release management service. So when is this coming? There's not a specific release date given, but based on the last blog from Microsoft back in late August from VJ from the product team, the availability for the new release management service is going to be sometime this year, before the end of this year. So within the next 2 months, let's say, just because we only have about 2 months left. So That would have to be it. And then it's going to be available in on-premise TFS in mid-2016 at some point. There is no specific time frame given for when in 2016, but you can expect it to be packaged up in one of the quarterly updates to Team Foundation Server. So if you're not familiar, for the past couple of years, Microsoft has been doing basically roughly quarterly updates to Team Foundation Server in Visual Studio. So there's an RTM version, and then about 3-4 months later, there's update 1. Then 3-4 months after that, there's update 2, update 3, update 4, etc. TFS 2013 got five quarterly updates actually. So at the same time as Visual Studio and TFS 2015 came out, they also released a 2013 update package just for people that couldn't commit to a full upgrade right at that point in time. So before I jump into demos, I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience. And if you want to unmute yourself and talk, that's fine. If you want to type, that's also fine. Okay, so, oh.
Well, I went ahead and unmuted the audience, so if you still have questions, go ahead.
I am going to take the silence as a good sign that everyone is happy.
We have a question coming in, Daniel. Does Release Management 2015 integrate with Jenkins?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question. So when you say Release Management 2015, are you talking about the on-prem Release Management client server, or are you talking about the new Release Management service?
On-prem.
Okay, so on-prem, as far as I know, not natively, so not in an integrated fashion, but you can definitely make it work. You can make Release Management Server 2015 or 2013 work with pretty much any build system. It's just not not like a native integrated thing.
Then we have another question. When will Puppet be supported?
That's a fantastic question. I can't speak to that, unfortunately. That's something I think that's between Microsoft and between the people at Puppet Labs. What I would expect is that based on the extensibility model that's going to be built in, either Microsoft or the community will write a Puppet deployment task. And then I see there's another question, is TFS 2015 required? So for Release Management Server 2015, TFS 2015 is not required. For the Release Management Service, the Release Management Service is going to be integrated into TFS, so obviously in that case, TFS 2015 would be required.
And for those of you, if you are listening, you can't see what I typed. Someone asked if this presentation will be available to listen to later. And yes, I'll be sending out an email after the presentation.
And there's one more question before we get into the fun stuff, which is, what about support for Team City with the Release Management Service? Same as Jenkins? I don't know, honestly. I can't speak for what Microsoft's plans are, but I do know that there is some Jenkins support. I think it's already in there right now, although I can't. Of course, one thing to keep in mind is everything I'm talking about in terms of the Release Management Service is still under active development and subject to change. So just because I see that Jenkins is supported today doesn't mean that it necessarily will be at release for whatever reason. So just take everything that I say about Release Management Service with a small grain of salt, because it's all subject to change as development continues.
So then there's another question here, Daniel. It says, so Chef, PowerShell, and DSC are the only sure tools right now?
Okay, so Chef, PowerShell, and Desired State Configuration are the only natively supported tools in Release Management Server 2013 and 2015. The Release Management Service as we'll probably see in a little bit, is going to support basically anything your heart desires.
Okay, so the next one is the end of agent-based deployment near? Any roadmap about the end of support of the agent-based deployment? And for how long will it still be available while we convert?
I can't speak to Microsoft's plans on that front, but my understanding is for a very long time. Support is not ending in the near future.
Next one, will release management support WebLogic Java deployments in the future?
Absolutely. Maybe not as something that's so WebLogic, and I'm not super familiar with WebLogic. Actually, let me revise that statement. I am not familiar with WebLogic. But basically anything that you can communicate with via a REST API, you can deploy. So Java is something that we can build right now with the new build system, and deploying it, I would expect that it won't be a big hurdle. Now, whether it's going to be something that's natively supported or not, I can't speak to.
Next one, does RM service use the same user management as TFS?
Yes. It's integrated with your Team Foundation server security groups and your Active Directory security groups, because, like I said, it's a first-class citizen part of Team Foundation server built right in from kind of the ground up.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions right now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to switch over and start giving a little bit of a preview of this new release management service. And one thing I want to say, I already mentioned this briefly, but I want to bring it back up. Everything that you're seeing is currently subject to change. It's under active development by Microsoft. They're pushing new features all the time. Oh, Stephanie muted me. Thanks, Stephanie. Jeez. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so I forget what I was saying earlier, so I'm going to just start. I'm going to start again. I'm going to go back to the first slide and do the whole presentation again. No, not really. So one thing before we start looking at anything else here is I want to just bring up two things. First thing is keep in mind that everything we look at with this new release management system is under active development and very much subject to change. So anything you see now might not necessarily be what you see at the time of release. That said, I think a lot of it is pretty well defined at this point. This isn't a super early preview. Another thing is this is currently in private preview, so you can sign up with Microsoft assuming that your intent is to actually use this. And of course, it's depending on a bunch of different factors whether or not Microsoft will let you into the preview program, but you can sign up. And the last thing is for anyone that's kind of in the ALM community or an ALM MVP or anything like that, I do want to just state that Microsoft is not big on people demonstrating this new release management service, but I did ask and receive dispensation to do that today. So everything here is above board. So with that in mind, what I have here, and I hope some people are saying that they can't see the presentation, which is not great, but other people can. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly unshare my screen and then reshare it, and we'll cross our fingers and hope that everyone will be able to see it at that point. Okay, so since I only have about 12 minutes left, I'm going to go kind of fast through this stuff. So right now I'm in Visual Studio Online. looking at the new build system. So this is the new task-based build system that I'm looking at right here. And I have a build for a web application called Fabricam Fiber. I'm not going to dive really deep into the new build system. If you haven't looked at it yet, go and look at it because it's awesome and I love it. But beyond that, I'm not going to say too much. The only thing I want to point out is that I have 3 steps here. So I have Visual Studio Build, and then I have a step to publish build artifacts, which pushes a folder called deployment scripts that takes the contents of this deploy folder and publishes it as a set of artifacts to my VSO server. And then I have a second publish task that takes everything in the _ published websites folder and pushes that to a separate set of artifacts called binaries. And if I look at this build that I had run a couple of days ago, I look at my artifacts, you can see that I have 2 sets of artifacts, deployment scripts, and binaries. So I can explore my deployment scripts, and if I drill in a little bit, I can see that I have a script called ffdeploy.ps1 and a configuration script called ffdeploy.config.ps1. So what these are desired state configuration scripts. And again, I chose desired state configuration just because it was going to be the easiest thing for me to do. I could have just as easily used Chef or just straight plain PowerShell. So with that in mind, I can go over to this new release tab. And I'm sorry for anyone that still can't see anything. I see some comments from the audience saying that some folks can't see things, which I apologize for. So on this release tab, I have a series of release definitions. And I can either see individual release status. So you can see I have some that succeeded, some that failed, and so on and so forth. But then I also have a nice overview tab. So if you're used to the traffic overview of the existing release management, this is kind of the same thing. So you can see I have a dev environment here that I successfully released to 2 hours ago. And then I have this test release where I have a more standard release path of dev, QA, staging, and prod. So if I go and I add a new release, it gives me some deployment templates for standard deployment scenarios. So I have a Azure website deployment and an Azure cloud service deployment. Microsoft, my understanding is that they intend to add additional templates for common scenarios to this, but right now we just have these 2. Or I can choose an empty definition, which is actually what I'm going to choose here. And so what I have is an empty release definition. So instead of a release template, this is called a release definition. And what this release definition is a combination of a release template and a release path. So I'm just going to call this my new release. And then you see over here on the left, I have the ability to add a series of environments. So I can say, I'm going to call this one dev. And then I can add a series of deployment tasks to this. So what's interesting is when I click add task, it shows me a whole slew of different tasks for various scenarios. So you see I have Chef right there. I have Docker. I have IIS web application with MS deploy. And then I just have the ability to execute PowerShell on some target machines. So there's a lot of different options that ship in the box, and all of these tasks are extensible, so you can write your own tasks and upload them as well. The other thing I want to mention is if you look under all of these other tabs, so like build and utility and test, the tasks that we have available for build can also be available for release. It's all based off of the same task architecture. So I can add a task, let's say for PowerShell on some target machines. So this task takes some parameters, including what PowerShell script to execute and what kind of arguments to pass, or what kind of initialization script to pass. And we'll get more into that later. But what's really cool is I could take this all of the tasks in this dev stage and save these steps as a template. So I'll just call this my template. And then if I add a new environment, I could say I want to use my template for a stage, and just add that in there and call that, say, QA. And it copied all of the settings. So that gives me some nice options there. So what I'm going to do is take you into an actual release, now that we've kind of seen a little bit about how it works. So my release for this Fabricam Fiber application consists of 2 steps. First is Windows machine file copy, which will actually take my, my binaries and push them over to my target machine. And then PowerShell on target machine, which will invoke a PowerShell script on that machine. And what you can see is my instead of specifying servers here, and by the way, I can assign approvers, same as we would expect. So I have a pre-deployment approver of myself and a post-deployment approver of automated. So that way there's no post-deployment approval necessary. So what I can do is I can specify a source for my binaries, a machine group to deploy to, and we'll look at machine group in a minute, and then a destination folder. So what's cool is my destination folder is a variable I defined called copy folder, which I can see over here under configuration. So I defined a variable called copy folder with a value of C:\rm release. And then at the environment level, I could even go and override that with a different value if I needed to specialize it per environment.
And we have a quick question here, Daniel.
Yeah, I'm running short on time, so I want to hold off on questions for a little bit. And I need to mute everyone. I'm sorry, there's someone that has a significant amount of background noise. Much better. Sorry about that. Okay, so this machine group is actually an interesting thing that we'll look at in just a little bit. But what you can see is on my artifacts tab here, I can choose a link to an artifact source. So if I actually just delete this for a second, I can choose to link an artifact source. So I can choose a build from Team Foundation server. I could choose Jenkins. So someone was asking about Jenkins a little bit. So there is a Jenkins option right now. And then I can choose what build definition I want to release from. And so looking here, it says the last successful build of Fabricam Fiber published deployment scripts and binaries. So those are the artifacts that are going to be available for me. And then under triggers, I can choose continuous deployment. So when my build for Fabricam Fiber finishes, it should do a release to my dev environment. And then under my machine group here, so I'm specifying a machine group instead of specifying that my dev environment consists of a bunch of servers. Well, that's great if I'm deploying to servers, but what if I wanted to deploy to an Azure website where I don't have a server, I just have Azure? Or what if I wanted to deploy in a scenario where I provision a virtual machine at the time of release? Well, I can't have a set of static servers for that. So now there's the idea of machine groups. So if I click Manage, it's going to bounce me over to a new tab where I can manage my machine groups. So and you can see my machine group named Dev has a provider of pre-existing machines, and it's created by me a while back. So if I edit that, I can choose what machines are part of my my pre-existing machine group, and then some credentials and basically how it's going to connect to these machines to do my deployment. So if I go back over to the release tab, what I can do now is just kick off a release. So you can see it's letting me choose my build version, choose my target environment, and create it. So now it says release has been created, or queued rather. If I go into that, It's saying a pre-deployment approval for dev is pending. Approve or reject. So I will, of course, approve that. And then you can see a recent activity log. Or just like the existing release management, you can go and view the logs as it's running. So I can see that it's starting a release, and as my release is in progress, this is going to update and kind of show me what's going on with my release. So while this runs, I'm going to answer some of these questions. So one of the questions is, are the custom templates specific to a team project or a team project collection or to a user? And the answer to that is, I do not know right now. I'm sorry. And then another question is, how do you secure a release path and an approval scheme? Which is a fantastic question. So while this runs, I'll go back to edit my release definition. And what you can see is you can set security. You can set security on a given release definition. So you can set who can administer release permissions, delete the release definition, edit definitions, edit environments, edit approvers. So you get the kind of full, robust security, and you can get as granular as you need. So you can set it at the project level, or you can set it at the individual definition level. And then there's a question, does this require PowerShell remoting, or are PowerShell scripts running on the local machine? It requires WinRM if you're using the set of actions that I'm using. So what you see is I chose to use PowerShell on target machines. This particular action does use PowerShell remoting, but another or WinRM at least. Now another deployment mechanism might use a different method to communicate with the servers. So the question is it possible to trigger a release based on a date time? Well, what you can do is you can trigger a build on a schedule based on a date time and have it set up for continuous delivery. So that build will be released when it's done. And then another question is there any MTM integration with vNext tasks? There is and there isn't. So basically, what you can do is under the test tab, you can run any sort of test you want as part of your release, and have the results uploaded to Visual Studio Online or TFS as test artifacts. So there is that kind of linkage between everything, but I don't see anything specific here right now, at least, that lets you run a specific test plan. And then a couple more questions. We're currently using TFS 2013 on-prem, adding lab management and then release management. Should I upgrade to TFS 2015 first? Also, should I wait for the new version of release management? I can't answer that question, unfortunately, without knowing a lot more details about your environment. So I'm going to give a very consultant-y answer and say that's probably a bigger discussion that we might want to have. How do you manage service accounts on servers if you have a lot of servers? That's a fair question. So if we go back to the machine groups, for this machine group, I can either specify a username to use by default for all of these machines, or I can specify username and password on a machine-by-machine basis. So I could have as many machines as I want in here, and some could be using different credentials than the global credentials here. So the next question is, will DAGPAC deployment be supported? There is a task for that, so I would assume that the answer is yes. So if we look under our tasks, there is a SQL Server database deployment task for doing a DAGPAC deployment. The next question is, can we do a release to a machine on a different domain? The answer is yes. The exact mechanics of how you would do that are a little bit broader than I want to kind of jump into right now because we're already a couple of minutes over. But fundamentally, yes, you can. Are there RM service tasks to launch Selenium or other automated testing tools? There's not any tasks right now, but you could certainly add them. Or you could use the Visual Studio Test Runner. So you can see that there's a testing tool for Run Visual Studio Test. So if you have your Selenium test written using, NUnit or MS Test or whatever the testing framework of choice is, you can certainly kick off those Selenium tests. And you can even kick off those Selenium tests on a test agent. So if you have a test agent defined, you can run those tests on that agent as well. So there's going to be a lot of options. It's going to be very powerful. The next question is, are SSRS reports deployment supported? I don't see anything out of the box, but like I was saying, you can write any task you want. So fundamentally, yes, because you could go and write your own SSRS task. So there might not be anything out of the box, but it's all very, very extensible. So there's a couple more questions. One is REST API with a question mark, and the answer is REST API with an exclamation point. So yes, there will be a REST API. And then can you demo any management reports? Release Management 2013 and 2015 reporting was non-existent. There's not a lot I can show you on the reporting front yet because I think that piece is still evolving a little bit. But there will be full reports. That's my understanding, at least. So now that we're about 5 minutes over, I think the deluge of questions has pretty much come to an end. Okay. Oh, there's another question. Excellent. Can I provide curated materials on Release Management vNext? I really can't give you anything that's not already public. So what I can do is I could give you links to Microsoft blogs and basically public information, but I can't give anything beyond that. And then there's another question, which is, we've had a hard time invoking a UI-based application on a remote machine. Any update on that? I would question why you're doing that or why you want to do that. I would expect that would still be problematic, and I think that's probably part of a bigger discussion about what your deployment is actually doing and why it's doing it. So as a test application has to be triggered after the deployment. That's kind of the follow-up to that last question. Well, I would say that if you could make it so that it could run without a UI, that would be the ideal. So someone says, just to confirm, Release Management Service will be deployed in TFS 2015 Update 1 for on-prem. The answer to that is no. It will be deployed in an on-prem update to TFS that is unnamed, that will be out in sometime in mid-2016. I cannot speak as to what update it will be, but update 1, I would guess that it would not be an update 1. So I hope that answers that question. And another question, can a desired state configuration deployment get triggered from the TFS build without the need to invoke a release? Yes. So that's kind of the nice thing about the build system and the release system. They share tasks. So a lot of the things you can do from release, you could do from a build if you don't need to have a full release workflow, release cycle between different environments. So if I go and I look at this build here, I should be able to add a build step for invoke PowerShell on target machines. So right out of my build, I could run some PowerShell. Another question, do you need Release Management 2015 to work with Team Foundation Server 2015? Release Management Server, Client Server Deployer 2015 will work with TFS 2013 or 2015 or TFS 2012, and I'm guessing probably 2010 as well. Basically, there's nothing that stops the Release Management Server from working with different versions of TFS. So before everyone starts dropping off, Stephanie, do you want to jump on and talk about this last slide here?
Sure, yeah, I'll just talk about it real quickly here. So we have a really cool upgrade, TFS upgrade program that we are running right now. So if you book your TFS 2015 upgrade with us by December 31st, we will donate $500 towards the charity of your choice. And again, it's only until December 31st. So after December 31st, we'll probably be running something different, but this is a great time to donate $500 towards a charity of your choice. And then Microsoft has an exciting new program, and this new program revolves around enterprise agility, DevOps, Azure, and Visual Studios. So depending on the specifics of your project, you may qualify for up to 8 days of professional consulting, and this is at no cost to you. So how awesome is that? You should definitely take Microsoft up on this program. And so to submit your project for qualification, you can email us at the info@incyclesoftware.com or call us at the 800-565-0510 you see on the screen. But if you have any specific questions for me, you can always email me at Stephanie, that's stephanie.long@incyclesoftware.com. And if you do contact us about this Microsoft program, we can definitely expedite this process for you. And then the next screen I just want to show, we have 2 more upcoming webinars. The next one is what's new and why you need to upgrade to TFS 2015. That is next Tuesday. And then the next one we have is on November 20th, TFS 2015 upgrade scenarios and how to avoid surprises.
Thanks, Stephanie. There was another question that was asked that I want to just quickly address. So the question was, are the releases that were created in Release Management Service visible in the Release Management Client? And the answer to that is no, and I would expect that would not be the case because the Release Management Client and Server are completely separate entities from the Release Management Service. So if no one else has any questions, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope that this answered a lot of questions and didn't raise too many new questions. For anyone that has any questions, they can feel free to get in touch with InCycle, and I can see about getting some answers for you. So thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever time zone you're in.
Thank you so much.